Okay, this is about one sentence from our group. And I'm reading the sentence. I cannot shrug my shoulder to the taxi driver that I am fed up with the way he is treating me. Well, there are several things going on with this sentence. And one thing I immediately think about is something that is going to immediately catch the attention or the eye of a English speaker, native speaker or advanced English speaker, is that we expect to hear the sentence in a certain order. There's a very strong syntax or sentence order or sentence structure, and English is very rigid. So subject, verb, object. Subject, verb, object. Tell us your subject, then the verb, what did that subject do? And then the object, what was verbed? What did they do that to? So the performer of the action, the receiver of the action. The performer of the action, the subject, the receiver of the action, the object. So that's the first transgression with this sentence. When you don't put that object right after the verb, not every single sentence in English is subject, verb, object. That's one of basically the most common sentence type in English is subject, verb, object. But not every single sentence is in that structure. There are other structures. But when the sentence should be in that structure, and like I said, most sentences in English do use that structure, then it immediately, you lose your audience, you lose comprehensibility, people's ability to understand you. The sentence begins to break down, the meaning begins to break down. I cannot shrug my shoulder to the taxi driver that I am fed up with. I cannot shrug my shoulder. So, shrug your shoulders like, So you cannot not care. Instead of, that's not the natural phrasing way to say that. Let's use a word, a verb, like I cannot excuse. That's the most common way you could say something like that. I cannot overlook. I cannot disregard. I cannot forgive. Because now I have a classic structure. I have my subject. I have my verb. I cannot excuse. Okay, now I need to tell the people what I can't excuse, what cannot be forgiven, what cannot be overlooked. That's what I need to put there. If I put the object, the recipient of that action, or what cannot be excused, if you don't put that, the question mark in the listener's mind is going to begin to form. And the effort and the work they have to do to figure out what you're talking about, what it means, it starts right there. So there are other issues with the sentence, but if you address that one, solve that problem, other things are much more forgivable. I cannot excuse the taxi driver for how he treated me. I cannot excuse what? How the taxi driver treated me. So the other issue there is maybe we're not so familiar with noun clauses, because obviously we're trying to figure out another way to express the idea without using a noun clause. In truth, all we need right there is a noun clause. I cannot excuse, I is my subject, cannot excuse, verb. What cannot be excused? Noun clause. How the taxi driver treated me. all done, neat and clean. I cannot excuse the taxi driver that I am fed up with. Okay, you already said you can't excuse the taxi driver, so you don't need to say again that I am fed up with. Obviously, you're displeased with the taxi driver because you can't excuse him. You can't overlook something about him. So you don't again need to say that I am fed up with. That's already been stated. But an even bigger problem than the fact that it's repetitious is the fact of the position. That is where the object belongs. That is where you tell us what cannot be excused. And instead of doing that and putting that in the right place in that sentence, right where we expect to find it, right where we expect to hear it, you put something else in there. So it's like a double transgression. I can compare this to a real life example. Let's just say that you are at the park and you're walking around and you see friends that you know, a married couple, and they are sitting on a bench at the park, on a park bench. The husband is sitting next to his wife. The wife is sitting next to her husband. What if you walk up and you're friends with the couple, but you're alone, you're not with your spouse, and you walk up and you say, "Hi, can I join you too?" And you sit in between them, in the middle of them. That is the position, the place where you chose to sit is the problem. Not the fact that you join them, not the fact that you also sit on the bench, but the fact that you sit in the position that you sit in. And so in these sentences, this syntax or this sentence structure, they're married on to each other. That subject verb object, you don't put something else in between the verb and the object. Or you're going to have that same gassed kind of expression and response from people listening, because that's not what they expect to find there. Now, if you are at the park and you see a couple that you know and they're friends and they're sitting next to each other, husband and wife, and their young daughter comes and runs up and jumps and sits in between them, that's fine. That's the indirect object. That is something that goes between the verb and the object. But if it's not the indirect object, then don't put it there, because that sentence is going to be very unnatural and people will have to work very hard to understand what you're talking about.